Hello and welcome to our special budget analysis at IB Times UK, and it's a great pleasure to welcome William Keegan, our chief economics commentator, to the studio. Straight on top of the budget, the Chancellor has just sat down. So, what do you make of it? Has George Osborne as Chancellor done enough to put David Cameron back into number 10 in May?
It's too early to say that. But it was, as people expected, a very political budget. One of the themes was he seemed half the time to be attacking Labour in various things they said over the years, rather than presenting a budget. He's followed Gordon Brown in producing a long budget of lots of individual micro measures that I think people were looking pretty bored at various stages.
Lots of things for the regions.
Lots of things for the regions, but of course,
where there are marginal seats.
Oh yes, I mean I don't know that he believes in the Northern Powerhouse. He certainly believes in winning marginal seats. But it was interesting that I thought the leader of the opposition, who for some reason always replies rather than the Shadow Chancellor, did rather well, and he did point out that this was rather specific, that the help for the regions was not exactly being appreciated by the leaders of people like the Leeds Council. Yeah,
the major thing he seemed to be saying there was that this is a budget that couldn't be believed. I mean, I have to say, it sounds impressive to the general voter. I mean, GDP per capita up 5%, unemployment to fall again by 5.3% again this year. You know, the deficit cut. Is he massaging the figures, or is it true?
No, well, he's not massaging the figures. Indeed, he made a point of. I thought it was pretty strange of him to criticise all predecessors for having fiddled and fixed the forecasts, in his praise for my friend Robert Choate, who's head of the Office of Budget Responsibility. But nevertheless, I mean, what he's trying to get away with, I think, and he may be successful, he may not, is to give the impression that this is that the plan has worked. What he leaves out, it's good to have these growth figures now, it's good to have unemployment down, but it is without doubt the slowest recovery on record. And we're only just back to the levels of living standards before they came in, and he did waste several years. But there's no reference to the flatlining. There was no reference to the fact that when he came in, there was an economic recovery underway, and he rather, to my mind, hit that on the head with his VAT
but
increase.
Nevertheless, we're out of the red and into the black, as he puts it.
No, we're still in the red, but we're less in the red.
I see. He seemed to be suggesting that we were. In a sense, home and dry, and therefore voters shouldn't mess it up by giving the government to anybody else.
To use a racing metaphor, and he had some help for the racing business, I don't think he's reached Tattenham Corner yet when it comes to being home and dry. But no, so it was very interesting that he distinguished the national debt as a proportion of GDP from the deficits, because he had promised to eliminate the deficit in 5 years, and he hasn't. Now that is good. It's just as well he didn't, because when growth was much slower than he forecast, he had then tightened the screws, that would have been disastrous. Made the recovery even slower.
So are you suggesting that when he says we're walking tall again, that he's overstating the position somewhat?
Yes, I am. I'm certainly saying that, and I do think it's rather goes against the grain of boasting about we're going to be the biggest economy ever and the French aren't doing well. If you go back over the years, the French economy hasn't done too badly. It's going through a problem at the moment. But I don't like that nationalistic stuff, but he seems to think it's necessary. It's a very electioneering budget, and it looks good now, growth, unemployment, etc., but it is actually a very bad record over 5 years.
Well, one thing that, in the electioneering sense, one thing that their research, that is the government's research, will have, or the Conservative Party's research will have shown them, is the fear that out there they're associated with being the friends of the rich and the city and financial services and so on. He did make an attempt to distance himself rather from the city and their supposed banking friends by raising a bit of a levy on the banks.
Yes, he did, and that's fair enough. But it was I thought it was somewhat duplicitous to say that the Labour Party had used taxation to rescue the banks, and now we're giving the money back. Because if the banks had not been rescued, I mean, they got us into the mess. If they hadn't, God knows what would have happened to the economy.
You're saying that's the one thing Gordon Brown got right?
He certainly got that right.
Yes, the rescue of the banks.
Yes, and also, as senior figures like the father of the house, Sir Peter Tapsell, point out, It wasn't really Labour's mess. It was an international banking crisis. You really cannot blame Labour for what happened all over the world.
It's quite an interesting point, though, there, isn't it? In fact, what we seem to be suggesting in an analysis of recent history is that Gordon Brown rescued the banks, which are historically the big friends of the Tory party.
Yes.
And now the Tory party seems to be hammering them with a new banking levy.
It is deeply ironic, but that's the way the world goes, and that's what kind of keeps life interesting. Sorry.
Well, yeah, it's interesting too, or at least we should remind ourselves, shouldn't we, that that this is, as you say, an electioneering budget, but in 6 weeks' time, it could all mean nothing at all, could it not?
Yes, there is a famous dictum which is repeated by most chancellors, usually after they've been chancellor, that budgets that look good on the day don't necessarily look good a few days later. Right. Most of these measures will be forgotten. We have, and what struck me today was that I share the general view, frankly, that so far Ed Miliband hasn't come across very well, and that shows in the polling. But today, that was one of the most spirited speeches I've ever seen. And if he gets across to people that although he's the Chancellor's making gestures, actually most people feel aren't doing too well. If they go on hammering away at that, then the election could be quite open.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much. We'll see what happens and how it's treated at the beginning of May when we go into what will turn out, presumably, to be the consequence of another budget very soon.
Yes, we'll
look forward to speaking to you about that. Thank you for joining us today. William Keegan, our chief economics commentator here at IB Times UK, and thank you very much for watching.